Hey, thank you all for coming tonight. We got Mugger and Joe Carducci here. And they're gonna. Did anybody listen to them today on WFMU? It was a very nice chat they had, and she played some great records. It was great that you guys got to choose some of the music that was played as well and talk about it. Just going to point out that we have all of Joe's books here. There are 5 books. The most recent one is Stone Mail, which he's been working on since I met him back in 1991. So it's only taken 25 years to get that out.
Rockin' the Pop Narcotic, I started it.
Right.
91.
Because I had Rockin' the Pop Narcotic in the store in Chicago from the very beginning. So what year did that come out first?
Early 91.
Early 91, so right when I opened the store in Chicago. And Enter Naomi, which is, I just finished, is an amazing book, and that's the one that really has a lot of history of SST, and a very personal book, too.
Well, it was like a gut punch, hearing someone you knew and worked with was dead at 38.
I'm going to hand the mic over to them and let them talk, and so you can hear them. So you guys are going to have to pass this back and forth.
I thought I'd ask Mugger to come this time because his perspective begins before mine as far as Los Angeles and Black Flag, and so maybe I'll just say a few things about L.A. L.A. had a reputation of from TV shows as palm trees and unserious goings on, and how it would. And I found that it was, I was in Berkeley buying records from bands, and I thought Danger House was the best label going in the late 70s, early 80s. Then SST after that, because Danger House pretty much ended. And then I got down there and, saw how many centers of activity there were in Orange County and Ventura County and Los Angeles County and inland in the desert. When I left, I thought Across the River was the best band ever, and, going at that time, 86, and they broke up and became Caius, and that whole scene was after I left L.A. And so, you'd have touring bands come in, and, the Husker Boys would talk about their scene, or people would talk about the New York scene or the Chicago scene, and, you didn't want to roll your eyes exactly, but there was just nothing else of the scale of Los Angeles music, whether it was Dada experimentalism or what we did at SST, which ranged from the Minutemen to St. Vitus. I mean, those two we had to, myself and Mugger were trying to figure out how do we make a markup when we're, paying per song mechanical royalties, and a St. Vitus album has 5 songs, and a Minutemen album has 20 songs. And, so I called Mike Watt, and we decided for an $8.98 list what was a fair average price. And Mike agreed that we could just make an $8.98 list a standard for mechanicals, and they would be the same for anybody, no matter how many songs were on the album. So, Mugger, that was sort of our, shit end of the business, but let's talk about before SST, when you were a kid and not going to high school, and you had a band, and that was, what year is that?
When I took off my pants in front of everyone and they saw what I didn't have. Pretty gnarly, right? But no, I was thinking about, Joe and I were talking today about at the church, right? Which was where Black Flag first started. And that's where kind of there was the Hollywood part of punk rock, which was the Germs and the Go-Go's and X and all that. But then there was the South Bay perspective. which was, Black Flag and the Circle Jerks. And there was also the Orange County version of it, which was Agent Orange, the Adolescents, and all. So there's these different areas in LA where the punk rock started to grow. And I was from Long Beach, not Long Beach, not, where's that Long Beach, Jane? Oh, not Long Island, Long Beach. Long Beach, where Sublime and Snoop Dogg are from, right? I think you guys know where that is. But anyways, so there's all these different areas, right? And we actually, we would fight, right? We would fight with the different areas because we looked different, We wore different clothes, right? So it was kind of interesting. But my friend and I, we actually went to the church, which was this church was no longer a church. You guys can come in. Come on, have a seat. No one's going to bite you. And so we had this. Greg Ginn actually had this, this place called the church, and that's where they would practice. And it was quite a great place where Red Cross, the Germs played there, and all these different places. And we slept down below in the church, in this like cellar, right, which was kind of interesting. And so like Ron Reyes, Chavo, which was one of the first singers of Black Flag, was sleeping there, with me and a bunch of other friends, and we were just hanging out. So it was like a group of people like this, right, just hanging out. But the difference between you and us down there is we had no money, right? And so we would hang out, and so people started to come in, and it was like they liked the music. Right, and it was so this place where we liked the music. And Greg Ginn had a electronics company called SST, right? And so Greg Ginn was making these electronic tuners for ham radios. And so me and Robo, who was the first drummer of Black Flag, we would put these tuners together, right? Because, well, we didn't have any money. Right, we didn't have any money, and we didn't have anything else to do, and so we would hang out. We'd put the tuners together, and then Greg Ginn thought, hey, these guys are, they're industrialists. They want to work, so he put me to work, right, helping him out, and then so we were hanging out. We started to tour. I started to tour with them. And they just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and so we were, like this guy here, we were putting up flyers in Berkeley, right? And so, I know a lot of you here, from being in New York and other areas, but it was all this industrialism that we wanted to do to make the band better, right? And so we were talking today, Joe and I were talking today about how it became like a commune, sort of a hippie thing, right? And not to say that we were hippies, we were like, kill the hippies, but we were still, really into just being together and hanging out with each other, and we liked each other. But then it became, as people got, smarter and older and stuff, it started to grow apart. And so we hired Joe, right, to be a part of SST Records, because we didn't have like we didn't have the sophistication of the market, of the distribution and all of that. So we needed somebody that wasn't sleeping in the basement of a church, maybe didn't party all night and got drunk, or maybe wasn't hanging out with all these weird people. And so he helped us to sort of to solidify and make it a more of a commercial industry. And we hired some other people that are in the room to help us out. We hired Ray Farrell, right? So we were going out and hiring all these people, but the problem is that we wanted to become, not me. I'm a high school teacher, so I didn't want to become a rock star. Well, I would like to be a rock star, but I wasn't a rock star. But we wanted, Black Flag wanted to make it, make themselves better, so they signed to a major label. Not a major label, but to Unicorn. And we talked a lot about the Unicorn thing, the Unicorn contract, and maybe Joe can talk a little bit about that.
Well, I came down because the people they trusted were you and Spot primarily, and they all went on the tour, and then there was no one at the office filling orders or even just taking calls for. There's no cell phones, of course, so they were going from payphone to payphone, or the messages would go to the club ahead of them on the tour, and so they needed someone running the office, and so I was at a distributor and came down to be that person, and then that was the point at which Unicorn, which had MCA distribution, was going to get the Damaged album in a lot more regular mainstream stores than had ever seen Jealous Again, say, which had been distributed by Gem Records, and by Gem I mean Gem West. I don't think Gem East ever paid any attention. They wouldn't even take the X record when Slash was putting it on. So those kinds of distributors were more importers of British major label new wave and punk rock. So around the Damaged album, Greg's plan was solidifying to do more than had ever been done, but then some people, maybe Rolling Stone, probably badmouthed Black Flag to MCA, who of course did not know anything at all, and they took that as a real thing and thought, oh, we can dump this money-losing label Unicorn and pretend we've made a moral stand against this horrific music and these dangerous people, and he became a laughingstock to the credit of Hollywood, but anyway, the choice then was to stay with Unicorn, which had a studio in which the record was recorded, so it kind of was convenient to go along with their new independent Pickwick distribution. Pickwick at the time was distributing Motown and Chrysalis, so they were able to move some records, but they also did not know anything about Black Flag or anything like it. So that was the mistake, probably. But, I was coming from an independent distributor, putting self-released records and small labels, like I said, Danger House and Posh Boy and SST, into very good collector stores, which are mostly fully used records and some imports, and convince them to take, great music that was coming out with very little promotion or anything. And Greg had bigger ideas. I think he did not at that point want Black Flag to be out on SST. And for 2 years, because of the lawsuit between Unicorn and Black Flag, we were a label that was working with the Minutemen and Saccharin Trust and Husker Du and the Meat Puppets and St. Vitus and some other bands. And the band Black Flag and SST, the label, which was myself and Mugger, and the day-to-day work of the label began to drift apart. And when they got free of their contract with Unicorn, it was 1984, and that was when the My War album came out, the Slip It In album came out. Everything Went Black. We repressed Damaged, and there was a Family Man spoken word instrumental record and a live album, and that was part of Greg's way of saying, you had to figure this out 10 or 20 years later with Greg. He didn't explain this at the time, but because he was sure SST couldn't do the job, he decided to release 4 albums in the space of a year, so that we couldn't do the job 4 times as poorly.
Can I say something? So I didn't mean to steal the mic here, and we'll go back and forth, and I'll hand it to him when I'm done. But anyways, at this time we had this this facility in Torrance, California, and it was on this street, and there's just, you know, a guy next to us is a guy cutting hair, and the guy on the other side is selling dresses, and there's this Photoshop place, because we had to make copies of the flyers back then, right? So we're putting up flyers all over the place, right? All over town, in Huntington Beach, and we'd go to every high school. But anyways, we're going on tour, and we're coming up to this facility, and there's like 10 of us living in this little place. It's about this size. And when I came in here, it looked about this size. And in the back, like in the back here, there was a spot like this, and that's where Spot lived, right? By the way, Spot's dad was what? What did he do?
He was one of the Tuskegee Airmen, one of the first black war pilots in the air, probably in the Army Air is what they were.
So anyway, Spot, right, would go back there, right, because Spot was like an individualist, right? He wanted to do his own thing. He didn't really want to hang out with us much, but he did. So everyone else was like sleeping on the floor in the spot like this, right? And we had records, and we had a little spot like we're in here where they would practice, and we put we went out and we stole carpet, and we put carpet all over the walls, so we can stop the sound. But anyways, we started to tour, right? And so we built the van to tour, and we noticed outside, right? There was this guy outside, right, in a trench coat, and he kind of looked kind of strange, and he was like checking us out. And I was bringing records back and forth from the record company that or the record manufacturer in the van, and we were putting them inside the small room like this, right? And so what happened is that the guy outside were actually cops, right? And so the cops were thinking that we were dealing drugs. And this was back when Pablo Escobar was doing his thing, and we had a drummer. Where was he from?
Colombia.
Oh, Colombia, right? So they probably thought that we were doing a little this and doing a little that, but we weren't. I mean, we had no money. We were just trying to get the records out. So anyways, I looked outside and I go, man, my mother grew up in the projects, right? So I know a bum, and I know when there's not a bum, right? So I'm looking out there and I'm going, who the hell is that? And so I opened up his can of beer, and it was a Coors Light. And I said, well, dude, you're drinking a Coors Light? Bro. But anyways, I'm thinking, that guy's a cop, man. I mean, come on. No bum's going to be drinking a Coors Light. So anyways, I'm out on tour with Black Flag at the time, right? And we're like doing our thing and, touring wherever. I don't even remember when we were touring. But the cops came in and raided the place. And when we came back, there was shit all over the place. They took apart everything. They went to our distributors, and they looked inside the records that we were distributing, and thinking that there was drugs in there, and they were following us all around, right? And I believe Mike Watt was in the location when the cops came. So it was kind of like, we felt it, but what do you do? Right? And so they had a white guy and a Mexican guy and then a black guy, and it's like, they have different types of guys coming in there thinking that, and they're like looking inside and asking us questions, and it was quite weird. Your turn, Joe.
Well, I was the other point of view shot in that, because I happened to call down and Spot answered the phone, and I was up at Systematic trying to order some records, and And every time, everything I asked Spot, he said, I don't know, and then started laughing. And I was asking him what's wrong or something. He eventually handed the phone to Mike Watt, who was also there, and Mike told me that the cops were going through the place, and what did I want? And so I figured I could call back later when they could take down some numbers and stuff. But yeah, that was a tour that Spot said he sold some records to record stores, bought a ticket with that money, and met you guys in New York. And Mike was there because he was there often, and you guys were still putting tuners together, probably.
No, we weren't putting tuners together at that time. That
Not
was,
in Torrance. Oh.
I think it was like we had like Jealous Again, and Nervous Breakdown. Well, you're still talking, right? Jealous Again and Nervous Breakdown, and we were bringing them in and we were shipping them out, right, at that point. So it was still pretty small, Black Flag would go to a gig and maybe there was 200 or 300 people, right?
Yeah, and the Jealous Again was a 12-inch record, so it had more visibility, and that was a push that they were doing, and but that's it was just a few months after that I saw the Chicago gig and offered to come down if they needed someone running the office, but I'm not sure what I'm asking to get involved in, because the police department isn't part of the record business as far as I knew. The San Francisco cops were a different breed of cop than the LAPD. But to go back to the label itself, I guess in this period when Black Flag is on ice, Greg is a purist, so he does not want to play the new songs he's working on, which are slower and more psychedelic and or progressive, time signature changes and stuff. And he's right, because friends of theirs would tour and they'd come to LA and want to see Black Flag practice. He wouldn't let them come because they were practicing what became the My War and the Slip It In album. And when they had added a second guitar, immediately the Circle Jerks and DOA and the Minor Threat, they all added second guitars. I mean, they were the weather vane sort of what was going to be coming, and you wouldn't think it if you met Greg, because he didn't seem like a rock and roll guitarist, but he was a brain, and that scene. I think we played some non-SST punk rock, and the level of attainment was such that even the bands we used to make fun of for being kind of simple hardcore generic music, when you listen to those this many years later, a lot of that LA stuff still has it's better played. It's got a kind of feral energy. People in LA spend a lot of time outdoors, and they have a free positive energy that that I mean, I told Mugger earlier today that it's you think of it as a major accomplishment. Some kids walk through the subway with their skateboards, and I thought, I grew up around cornfields in Illinois, and I was part of the great Southern California culture machine that everyone wants a piece of and you saw it, walking around, and like Henry once said, his regret, the only regret he had was not getting there sooner, because I think Hermosa Beach, in 76, 77, when you guys were kind of getting together around the church and stuff. Greg met Spot, who was writing for the Free Weekly about music, and Dez's dad ran the Lighthouse Jazz Club, and Spot was interviewing jazzmen and rock bands and Sky Saxon and, just whoever was coming through town. And the Fleetwood in Redondo Beach had Patti Smith come in, the Ramones, the Germs, hippies were beating up punk rockers and vice versa.
Kill the hippies.
And then, but all of that stuff was going on, and St. Vitus guys, they were at the Fleetwood and saw bands, they probably hid their hair in their baseball caps or whatever they would do, because it got, well, this is your department. Why don't, most people have seen decline of Western civilization. Why don't you talk about Eugene and X-Head? People don't know who they were, really.
So X-Head, the reason why they called him X-Head, and did everyone see the decline? Yeah, so X-Head's the guy with the X on the back of his head. And he wasn't a big guy. Maybe he was about 5'5", but he could fight, right? And he was a fighter. So everywhere he'd go, he'd beat up people. And then what happened was a bigger guy came up and knocked his clock. And after that, X-Head was no longer X-Head. He took the X out because that was a mark. Because, hey, I'm a tough motherfucker. But you know what? There's always somebody, right? Stronger than you, right? So X-Head got it, right? So Eugene, right? Eugene was half black, half Indian. He grew up in, his parents were really rich, and so he ran away from home. And Eugene and I, right, lived in Holly Western, which was what do you call it? We were squatting. We were squatting in this big building. Right, and there was all these people, all kinds of, just poor people in this big building, and we had no money, right, and we were just living in some place where we were just trying to get as much as we can, and so there's a band called the Chiefs, and they're one of the original punkers in LA, and they actually wrote a song called Holly West Crisis, right? And that's us living, squatting, and it was like maybe 20 punkers with like 200 just derelicts, right, that are big, selling drugs and all of that. So Eugene and I, right, because it was about 90% black, right? So Eugene and I coined the term Nig-Heist, right? Because, we're there and there's all these other people, so and that's the band that we came up with. And we also, at the same time, Eugene and I came up with another band that's a famous New York band, and that's the Cro-Mags. And that's my name, because Eugene and I and that guy Harley, we kind of have this, look at me, kind of a monkey feature, right? So we call ourselves the Cro-Mags. And so I came to New York and I said, Harley, we should start a band, bro. I got my buddy, and you kind of look like a Cro-Mag like me. And so he took the band from me. You can Google it, he'll tell you, right? I mean, Google doesn't lie, right? Look it up right now. So so at that time, but Eugene is actually still playing music, and I'm tone deaf and colorblind, and I can't sing. So if so, I would probably still be hanging out with Eugene at the time. But this is pre hanging out at the church, right? This is I don't even know what year it was. Probably 78. I was probably like 16, like the age when I met you, right? No? So, we were just kids, right? Just hanging out. And we were squatting with men selling drugs. And Eugene is actually younger than me, and he's really small, right? And so we're a little nervous, right? Back to you, Joe.
Well, I was always impressed when Mugger would introduce me to someone like Jason or Brinson. He was a roadie as well, and
Circle Jerks.
yeah, and because I knew that you guys were the gold standard of troublemakers, you know, just a few years before I got down there. And, you know, like I said, I knew that Black Flag was, you know, SST was the place to be because of what they were doing. That, you know, the Dead Kennedys and the Bad Brains and whoever else was really good, they just weren't able to, you know, people had to work, they had to maintain an apartment or whatnot. And with Greg, he always had a business address where the band could crash if they had to, and they were not allowed to have a job, so that they were free to hit the road and stay on the road. And I was there to, you know, foster that freedom on their part as well. And a guy named Mike Shepard was supposed to come in at the same time to do the booking that Chuck had to keep doing from the road, because they would go on a tour where the last week or so might not be booked yet. And, you know, to do that from payphones, you know, gas station to gas station must have been no picnic. But in thinking in terms of these stages of the history, once Black Flag is back free and releasing records, they're pretty sour on us, and are convinced that we're not interested in Black Flag. We're interested in Husker Du and you know, and the Meat Puppets. Well, this is I left before that came out, so Mugger stayed 3 years at least beyond when I left in early '86. But I did see the Sonic Youth Evol artwork come in and the parts come in, so that was on its way. But at one point in probably in late '84, early '85. We had one of our rare meetings, you know, the four owners, and Greg's idea at that point was to give you and I the label in exchange for help setting up Black Flag Records, a label that would be just Black Flag. And they knew they needed help doing that kind of stuff. Davo would have been, you know, involved, and they had people, Jordan Schwartz and some other people around them. Naomi Peterson was working over at the Global office where they did the booking and the practice. But you know, I don't know if he was stunned, you know, when I said I didn't want to hang around to work with those other bands, because again, I sort of worked with the part-time bands up in Berkeley when I was distributing records. And, you know, at that point anyway, the Dead Kennedys would fly to the East Coast and play some gigs, and then they would fly to London and record an album in London, and it would come out in London, come back in as an import, didn't sell anywhere, didn't, you know, then it couldn't. You had imports in every store. No one wanted to put out a domestic version because those records would stop the buyer from, you know, buying more copies. So you had nobody like Black Flag, even though some bands had a profile and people knew them. But so I told him I didn't want his share of the label. You know, it was only worth being at if Black Flag was on the label. So that idea went by the boards, and we kept on for, you know, in my case, I made a deal to get out in late '85, and I trained Rich Ford, who had played guitar in Chuck Dukowski's band, SWA, and you stayed until '89, and why don't you talk about when I left, and you know, you were one of a trio of owners.
So we went from 2 to 4. It was me and Carducci, and so there was, like, you know, kind of like the UN type of thing, where nothing really got done because Joe and I would always agree on two things, and those guys wouldn't, and they were trying to do promote Black Flag, and they wanted us to spend most of our resources on it being a Black Flag label. I mean, all of our money going to Black Flag. And at that time, I was in control of the money, and I would get the money in, and I would just spend it like, this person sold this many records, this person sold that many records, and I would just divide it up. Like we're like Marxist, right? Just divide it up against the people, right? And we paid people fairly, right? But Black Flag wanted us to spend more on them, and so that was our big problem. But at this point, we then moved to another area, which was in Redondo Beach, California, and it was on a street called Phelan Avenue. Right, and so on Phelan Avenue, again, it was about this big, and again, it reminds me of this, but it's in Redondo Beach, and so we had, again, actually, I built Spot, right? I built Spot this little castle, right? So he was on this bunk bed. Spot was on this bunk bed above Lurch, which we called Greg Ginn at the time, because he kind of looks like Lurch, right? So, and he told me, Mugger, don't fucking ever call me that again. But I kept calling him Lurch, right? So, anyways, we put Spot above. Lurch was at the bottom. Chuck Dukowski was like back there, because Chuck Dukowski is an only child and he wants it all his way. And then Joe Carducci was like over here by his books. Henry Rollins was back in the corner, right? And I swear, sometimes at night, no, I don't want to tell you what he was doing at night, because that's gossip. And then I was like behind Chuck Dukowski, and then Davo, right, which toured with the Meat Puppets, was there. And it was like it was like a commune. We were all working together, right? And so we were touring. When we go out on tour, Joe and Deep Boone and Mike Watt would help us out and do things and make the label continue to run. About that point, I decided to devote my attention with Joe on SST, because there's tons of bands that we wanted to sign. We had more bands. I mean, Suicidal Tendency came to us and said, "Can we want you, on your label?" And I cried to Chuck and to Lurch, say, "Can you sign Suicidal Tendencies?" Right? And they didn't want to do it. I think because I don't know why they want to do it. Maybe it was too much competition. But at this point, we were all like, going down the same avenue. Right? We wanted this label. We believed in Black Flag. We were putting up flyers all over the place. We were working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and no one fucking complained, right? A few people complained, but not Carducci and I, right? But everyone was like working really hard, right? And at one point, that's when people started to think that, oh, I want to be better than you. Or I'm better than you, right? And so at that point, that's when we started to have some discord amongst the ranks. And that's when we moved to different facilities. And Joe will talk about the movement from the different facilities at that point, going from Phelan Avenue to Inglewood and some other places that we went to.
Well, I'm still in touch with Chuck occasionally, and but Greg is, he's in orbit somewhere. There's no talking to him, and
smoking weed.
and but I told Chuck, in retrospect, I wish this Phelan Avenue office that was this size was only $100 a month, and it was hard to give that up. We were in we weren't near the beach anymore, but we were in Redondo Beach, I told Chuck, in retrospect, we should have kept everything under one roof, because the paranoia was otherwise, there's no way around it. You didn't see each other enough to, dissipate it. And since it was such a relief to have the office, with just the two of us, and then Janine became the mail order person, and we had 3 people in there after, and the band was only a block away where they could practice and do their booking. But it was inevitably that the split would widen, but Chuck said he said I shouldn't blame myself for all of that decision on things. So I mean, he knows more than he's comfortable to talk about in terms of what was Greg thinking and all of that. But in retrospect, I was surprised when sometime around the late 80s they put out their T-shirt that read "Corporate Rock Still Sucks." And it came, I guess it was the Nirvana, and before Nirvana there was a lot of signings. The major labels were signing bands off of independent labels, and because I never knew Greg to think that, really. I mean, he expected Black Flag would be on a major label, and it would be in every mainstream chain record store you could get into, and that it would sell because they were around the country, and word of mouth from the gigs meant there was always more people the next time they went through, whether it was Topeka and they were in some kid's garage the first time, or a gay club on a Monday night in New Orleans, or wherever. And I missed that end of the business. I would go up the West Coast occasionally, or to Arizona, but when Spot left the tour, mostly to save his ears from doing live sound, because he's a musician foremost and an engineer producer secondary. But when he left the tour, Mugger, you became the sound man, and Davo became the roadie, or the tour manager, whatever you'd call that position. And then you left the tour, and the label had a real kind of a full-time core that made it function, consistently. I was going to say something more about. The other problem, I guess, is Greg is a genius, and I remember somebody describing Orson Welles' problem with shooting a movie, because every morning he had a new idea, and he would then, his mind was such that he could then backfill the new idea through everything that had been shot and written, foreshadowing what was thought to be what to shoot next. But since that changed, all of that foreshadowing of the process of writing and shooting, the whole puzzle would change. And he did that every day, Orson Welles on his movies, and until the studio would grab him and kick him to the curb and have his cinematographer finish the movie. And this, what struck me about that insight was that Greg was a bit like that, because as we rationalized the label business, it's the shit end of the business, kind of boring. It's just routine, and but it's important. And as we did that, we knew what we were going to be doing finally next month. And then we knew 3 months ahead, and then we knew 6 months ahead, and we felt like we were really getting a grasp on how the money coming in would come in likely, where it would need to go, whether it was a recording studio bill or the pressing plant bills. But as we got towards that 6-month envelope, that was the exact opposite of what Greg wanted us to be doing. Like you said, he wanted, what's today's plan about what Black Flag is doing, and everything else would be reassembled around whatever that was. And sometimes that was the idea of a gig, and so that would involve major promotion, and all these guys in the different bands and friends would go out in groups to paste up flyers all over the 3 counties, because if they were playing the Santa Monica Civic, they'd fly a plane over the US Festival, which was Apple Music's first foray into music. And there was a Clash night, and I don't remember what else was there, but there was a metal night, and we couldn't get into the parking lot. In a normal metal show at the Long Beach Sports Arena for Judas Priest, they would just put flyers under the windshield wipers for a Black Flag show. But we couldn't get in there, and so the idea was you had to fly a plane with the bars and the Santa Monica Civic date, and nobody had. We needed a photographer, to capture that. I had never seen an image of it, but it was mentioned in one of the reviews as if it were a hopeless gesture. And I remember reading that to Greg, and he said, "Yeah, and when everything changes, they'll think they did it, or it just happened." And so you knew that he knew that you took all the money and you put it back in, and you thought of ways around the disinterest and the ignorance. And I didn't realize they'd already flown Black Flag information down the beach. I don't know if you remember that, but hiring a plane to drag a sign through the air is, awesome. I mean, it's like a specter on the beach, or who knows what the crowd was like at the US Festival. I don't know if they even did a second one, but it was very successful. I think there was a lot of people there, and but you guys would do high schools, and I remember junior highs. All these things were circled on these giant maps of Orange County, Los Angeles County, Ventura County, and guys would split up in different vehicles, and you go on foot from post to post around those areas.
I was telling Joe when I was hanging out at Jane's house here the other day about a book that I read. It's called Off-Centered, right? And it's by a guy in Maine, I believe, from Dogwood or Doghead Brewery, right? And so Dogfish Brewery, right? And so he's a punker, right? And so I was reading through his book, and it was just because it was like a history of craft brewery, right? And I was more interested in the history of craft brewery. But then in the book, just by, I don't know, osmosis or luck or whatever, he starts talking about punk rock, right? And he starts talking about punk rock from the perspective of DUI, doing it yourself, right? And so, DIY. Thank you, Linda, right? Sorry, I don't know my acronyms. But anyways, I had 4 beers. That's not drinking. And since I'm thinking about a craft beer, I was thinking about the book that I read. But anyways, he starts talking about punk rock, right? And he starts talking about DIY, right? Do it yourself, right? And so that's what we were all about, right, back then. And that's not we, right? We learned from Greg Ginn, right? And Greg Ginn says, and it's not really Greg Ginn, it's his dad, Regis, right? And his dad, Regis, came up with just, he published his own book. He did all these things, and that's where Pettibone was from. And so Joe and I learned from that, right? And we learned from Dogfish or whatever that. He learned from it too. And the craft brewery, right, he went out and he made all these changes to beers. He tried all these different things, right, and he learned from it, right? And he learned and he was creative, right? And so if you lose your focus, right, as Mark Twain would say, you work on your creativity, right? And so we continued at this point because we were all in a room together. We were all talking together. This is back to the Phelan commune that was this big, and we were all in a room, and we would talk, right? And we would talk about what we wanted to do. And this is then the Dogfish guy said the same thing. And sometimes he said he got away from not listening to the people around him, right? Because he wanted to focus on it on his own. And sometimes he lost his focus because his ego got too big. And so at the point where Joe and I said we can't deal with this anymore is because we put everything we had in our life in this record label, right? And we worked our fucking ass off, right? And so you have this guy wanting to have an airplane go over the beach with his logo on it, right? Are you kidding me? Right? You know, not everyone likes rap. I like rap, but not everyone likes rap, and not everyone likes punk rock, right? So you only have so much money and so many resources. So to get back to Mark Twain, we lost our focus, right? We lost our focus, and so we started to get into this big argument all the time. So we had these long meetings where people were disagreeing, right? Where people were starting to, criticize people, right? About, oh, you did this, you did that, right? And so what happened was we lost our focus, and it pissed him off, right? And he said, fuck this, right? I can't deal with these. Look at these guys, right? I can't deal with these guys. And so, I didn't have as many opportunities as he had, so I stuck around a little bit longer, and I felt I can't deal with these people, right? Because they're not listening to me. They're not listening to the people around them, right? They want their logo to be, on the beach and all of these things. And so he went around and he burned all his bridges. And so some people only want people around them that say, oh, you're so great, right? But if you've known somebody for a long time and you're a friend, I've known Joe for 30 years, and I never said, Joe, you're so great, but he knows that I know he's great, right? And he knows I don't have to tell him. But some people continually need to be reassured of their greatness. And it was kind of funny today. We played a couple of songs, right, on the radio show, which I forgot the radio show today that weren't Diane's Kamikaze radio show, right? And one of the songs that I picked was DD Detroit, right? Which was Paranoia is Freedom, right? And I picked that song because these guys started smoking a lot of pot, and they started to get paranoid about the people around them. Right, and when I smoke pot, I get paranoid too. That's why I don't smoke pot, right? And then we also played a song for Linda Kite, right, which is by the Avengers called "We Are the One," right? We are not communist, we are not fascist. And at that point, when we were in this little room talking about all the ideas, we were the one. Right, and we had so much, and then at one point, the evil, Ayn Rand communist or capitalist came in, and it really destroyed us, right? And it pissed us off so much, so we said, fuck this, man. We're not going to hang around with this because we were belittled all the time, and we didn't have our input in it. Sorry about that.
Well, it's kind of funny because when Bill Stevenson became the drummer, in a way, during the Unicorn thing, he's the reason the band continued. I think Greg was maybe inclined to start over and just to give up the name, which was what was at issue with the 2 years they couldn't do anything. But Bill and Kira were a great rhythm section, but Greg Ginn's idea musically then was a socialist beat, and he wanted to do his soloing off of almost a plane, of equal beats, no emphasis, no syncopation, no features on this rhythm, and Bill knew that as the drummer in training. He knew that as the socialist beat, and it was hard for him because in the Descendants he had a lot of leeway. It was his band, his songs.
Socialist or fascist?
No, they were socialist. Yeah, Chuck had the saying, what was it? Fascism for you, anarchy for me. Wasn't that it? But in terms, if you remember that period of band, you wondered, why is that rhythm section so monotonous? And when you knew they were all really listening to King Crimson and how John Wetton and Bill Bruford were, they had tripwires everywhere. Yeah, well, Dio, they were listening to Dio, but that was Greg.
It was on Stevenson's drum.
Yeah. Yeah, you had no choice if you were in Greg's band. You listened to Dio. Occasionally, it was on the PA, right? And you would hear it in the club. But the Dio thing is interesting too, because in a way he was trying to re-engineer, as he did with Bill and Kira, he's trying to re-engineer Henry, in the sense that Dio the way he sang on the beat and framed the rhythm of the lyrics as he sang them, and a little Dio goes a long way if you're driving around America. I don't know how they did it. I mean, I wasn't in the van, so I'm glad. But when you were in Europe with Mike Watt in the van and D. Boone, right? The Minutemen on tour in Europe, and the fight was over the cassette player, because Mike Watt could not sit still listening to Dio, or what else was what Mahavishnu. Maybe he liked it once or twice, but why don't you remember those tours?
Yeah, well, Henry would play like the Misfits and all his, and we like the Misfits, but you wanna listen to the Misfits all the time. But I want to just. Okay. I do too, but once a week, not all day in a van, right? So Dio, Mahavishnu, you need to have a little bit difference. But I want to get back to the beat, right? And to get back sort of to go off of what Joe said about the socialist rhythm section. But when you dance, right, and when you're dancing with a partner, right? If you're dancing by yourself and not going with the person that you're dancing with, you're out of sync, and you're not gonna have a happy ending, right? If you're in that situation, right? If you get what I'm saying. So with sorry, but with Greg, right? It was his beat, right? And so with Kira. With Kira and Bill at the time, they were having some happy endings in the van, right? And so their rhythm section was way in beat more than anyone's fucking rhythm section. If you have the bass player and the drummer doing their thing, right? That's the best beat you can have in the world, right? If you think about it, right? And so whose beat is better, Bill's and Kira's, or Lurch? Actually, he's a great guitar player, and I'm just joking. Back to Joe.
Well, Greg's, I was just explaining how Spot plays, with time signatures and stuff. Greg did that too, but he wanted to jump off of, a real grid of rhythm that was unmoving, basically. Still you can see some really nice YouTube clips where, the rhythm section is expressive and it's good. But right after the Damaged album, I guess I should mention that the real crux of the problem of recorded Black Flag is that the early singles are all one guitar, recordings, and the Damaged album has two guitars, but all those songs were written for one guitar, and then all the songs on Slip It In and My War were written for two guitars, and they ended up playing with one guitar. They were recorded with one guitar because Des left the band. And so there's a flaw. It's just, and you have to know that Greg hated that. But he was, in debt. He had 10 people around him, waiting to see what was going to happen. Those things had to come out. They couldn't be re-recorded with a new 5-piece. There wasn't much. So I understand how sour he got, in those periods. But once he had Bill and Kira, then you had the Slip It In album, which the tunes maybe aren't as good as the My War album, but the playing and Spot's production, I mean, that is a powerful record that really makes sense. And then there's Loose Nut and In My Head, and I would say In My Head is the record Greg was working towards ever since the Damaged album. And they went back to Dave Tarling, who had engineered the Nervous Breakdown 45, and he had been a metal guy by then. Yeah. And he was all metaled out, and so there's something wrong with those records acoustically, and Henry's vocals are pushed way down in the level. They're very obscure. What would you say? They're very eccentric recordings. But In My Head, there's good songs on Loose Nut, but In My Head is a great record, and it was nice to see Robert Palmer, the blues scholar, review In My Head in the New York Times and go back through the records and understand what the band was trying to do, because everything was fucked up all down the line, and the stuff came out because it had to. There was no redo, and when you go back and you listen to Jealous Again or Nervous Breakdown or Six Pack, I think Mike Watt and you were talking about Clocked In as being the best Des Cadena recording and mix, and the studio happened for that song as a moment of perfection, I think, but all that stuff is so natural. Greg wasn't stuck in his head so much in that period, and that stuff changed the American music scene, even though well before they ever toured, the Nervous Breakdown single just got its hooks into people in every city. Very few people, but 5 or 10 people, and I was buying those records from the label and selling them into the best stores that were around. We didn't have so many accounts in New York and L.A., but we sold to every other city really, and eventually into the big cities as well. That was at Systematic, and that all continued. And then eventually the import distributors got into funding their own labels, and that hurt us because the money came back to us slower, and they were signing imitations of the Meat Puppets and imitations of the Minutemen and Black Flag, of course, and you really don't have more than a 1 or 2 year window before well-meaning fans or kids who just want to try it clutter up the landscape everywhere. And you got it.
Can I go?
Yeah.
All right. Sorry. I get back to the craft brewery, right? So after like 2 years, you're drinking the same beer. You get a little bored of it, right? And you want to move on. So these people come up with new flavors. And so if you think about Black Flag, right, they went first through Keith, right? Then Chavo, then Dez, and then Henry. So who's in the audience here? Whose favorite? Who's Black Flag? Who did? Who liked Henry the most? Who liked Dez the most? Who liked Keith the most? And who liked Chavo the most? Or Chavo? I like them all, you know, and it's kind of like, do you like Chardonnay, or you like Cabernet, or you like craft beer? I like them all. But the point is that at one point with Dez, right? Dez, we thought about Dez, and we asked Henry to come rehearse for us. And I think it was in New York, and like what Joe was saying is he came in and he sang Clocked In, right? And it was so intense. When we saw him, I was watching him, and there was like 3 or 4, there was the band, and I think me and Spot were sitting and watching them. We go, fuck, this is amazing, right? So he came in and he was so intense. And so he was so intense, right? And they wanted, you know, a hardcore guy. You know, and Henry was a hardcore guy. But the problem is they wanted something, but their music was changing to something else. And their music was changing to something else that would probably be more appropriate for Dez, if you think about it. You know, all of the new songs which were more intricate. He grew his hair. Yeah. No, but I don't know how it would be with somebody else. But I was just thinking that I think it gets back to the beer analogy, is that, you know, you want something different. And which one's the best? I think that Joe and I would both agree that we like them all, right? And it's a difference. But I think that with Henry, right, they wanted something, but what they wanted wasn't the way they were going.
No, and he never would have. I mean, it's amazing, really, what he put up with. And, I mean, the vibing, you know, in the van is magnified, I'm sure, by the steel shell you're in. But the other thing is, I do want to take questions, but the other thing about Henry that, you know, strikes me today is the alt culture, or the hip culture, is so allergic to working class macho now. And you saw a little bit of that when Henry joined the band. People like Red Cross didn't like that, and people who were, you know, there were people who were friends of Keith because he was a great partier on the scene, and you understood why they preferred Keith. But you know, I always had you know, was interested in like Wino from The Obsessed and St. Vitus and Danzig and Henry as these East Coast. You know, they had something that you didn't find in the West Coast. Generally, it was not a good thing, but if you're an artist and you put out like those guys did, and I thought that was in a way rarer than. You know, in LA there were a lot of great free performers because it was a freer culture, a freer landscape. You could tell those guys grew up fighting, you know. I mean, you fought, but that was by choice. But should we take questions? Or
Yeah, let's take questions.
About any band?
Where does like New Alliance come into the picture, sort of? Like, I mean, how did that work with the SST as a whole?
Well, they were separate. So at Systematic, I bought from Mike Watt their records, and when
Did he continue to be involved with it throughout the '80s, or did he kind of hand it off?
Yeah, he did. He did. We did sort of like a marketing thing at some point, and then I think about 87 or 88, he sold it to SST. And probably, it was partly D. Boone's project as well. So once he dies, Mike is not the same person really. But they did Husker Du records and the Descendants album, just awesome records. I wish we could have done them all because the other bands always had an offer to record were the Bad Brains and Red Cross and Flipper maybe, and but they were not. New Alliance was not quite full-time label. They would put out a record and it'd be a great record, but that would be it. It wasn't worked, or the bands didn't tour. Another, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about Systematic? How that came to be, or how it worked around,
Oh, yeah.
different labels?
Well, we were in Portland, and really, I had lived in Hollywood without knowing anybody in the music scene. I was looking to get into the film business, and I didn't like Hollywood was a ghetto back then. The air was so bad, leaded gasoline. It was interesting. I'm glad I was there, but I moved to Portland and got into the record business there. And it was just an import-only store that spun off of the greatest store up there, Millennium, Music Millennium, and one of the guys had gone. One of the owners of Renaissance had gone to London and walked into Rough Trade right after it opened, and the Rough Trade store they intended to be a reggae store, and they're a bunch of white guys who really loved reggae, and then they were profiled in the NME, and all the bands sent them their record to see if they would distribute it. So they became a big distributor, and we used that connection to start bringing in their releases as they did it and other stuff they distributed. So Renaissance Systematic began working with Rough Trade, and I was writing American bands and labels like Danger House and Discord and whoever was doing interesting stuff, and buying 50 or 100 or soon for some albums 400 and more, and for distribution to record stores and mail order. We had a mail order, and we had a label too called Optional, and we released Dead Kennedy's singles and the Def Club live album and Pink Section and Voice Farm and Negativland, some other stuff. And I had a label up there called Thermidor, which was also doing non-Bay Area bands mostly. And we moved to Berkeley because that's where Rough Trade wanted to be, and they were going to open a company. So we did a push to get more accounts, and then we were going to split the accounts with Rough Trade. And so it was a plan, and it was based largely on what they could do. And for a time, they had records like Stiff Little Fingers and Young Marble Giants and Joy Division and Crass. There's a bunch of stuff that really did sell. Most of their stuff was really English and of minor interest. People liked it, but it was minor. So, when I started buying, people were putting out the Jealous Again, the Avengers 12-inch. Adolescence album, Circle Jerks. I mean, we're blowing through 400 of those at a crack, and my partner never thought that the American stuff would sell at all. There's this idea that this music comes from England, and that existed among buyers in stores, certainly at college radio stations. And so the LA thing was aided by the Decline movie. People got to see a little bit around the country in a movie form. That was a big thing. Maybe some of the wrong bands were in the movie, but she put in Black Flag and the Circle Jerks at sort of as a last minute thing, because it was really a Hollywood band project, and maybe the Plug should have been in that instead of Catholic Discipline or it's pretty much the Bags, but they were broken up, so they called it the Alice Bag Band. But but anyway, that's why when I said to Greg, hey, I'll come down and run your office if you need somebody, he thought I was the owner of Systematic, but he knew that they would go into stores and ask, where'd you get the records? And, nobody got them from anywhere but us. So, like I said, Jem West could sell records in L.A., but Jem East would they wouldn't carry. Jem West made the deal for the first X album, and they made the deal thinking Jem East was going to pay attention to it, and they didn't order it. And Jem West only went west of the Mississippi, so it was a catastrophe, and we had to work weeks to convince Slash and Jem that Systematic getting the X album would not hurt them, because we didn't actually sell that many records in L.A. The bands brought the records to Zed and, Rhino and a couple places, and all that got done without us. They didn't really need us, but the rest of the country needed us to get L.A. music, and that included Los Angeles. And finally, I think we did get to carry that, because they must have been mortified that Jem East would be like that. Yeah.
Raymond Pettibone, you mentioned him a little bit. He's so important. The iconography and all that, SST, right? And then I've read, they had this huge art show here recently, right? You go through how much maybe you didn't really hang around the shows and all that kind of thing. Can you say how much he was around? Was he around, hanging out? How him and Greg did or did not get along? Or not? You don't have to say.
Well, we know that. I mean, we'll start off with Regis, right? And Regis, their father's an eccentric. Probably. They're all really smart. And Pettibone hanged out with us. I hung out with Pettibone more than I hang out with his brother Greg, right? So Pettibone actually had a little room next to the first Global office, which was when Black Flag separated. So he would do his art there. I posed for him a couple times naked, but don't tell any. Don't tell. He's not gay. I'm not. I mean, he might be gay, but I'm not gay. No, he's not gay. But yeah, he was a part of us. He hung out with us. We went to gigs with us. But it gets back to kind of the brothers fighting. He came up with the bars, and there's a book about the bars over there. If you guys have some money, you should buy it. It's a good book.
Buy my books.
Yeah, or buy Joe's books first about the bars. But Raymond came up with the bars. Raymond came up with the idea of the band Black Flag, right? So he's eccentric. He's really smart. But the two brothers didn't get along, right? And you could see it early on. They would never hang out, right? They played basketball together as kids, and they competed. And one of them was better than the other. I won't tell you which one is better than the other. But we started to play basketball when we were on Phelan, which was the commune place where all the ideas came about. And one of them wouldn't go play with the other one, right? So they didn't like each other, right? And there's a long, as Joe would say, there's a long story, that they didn't get along. But they're two really, very smart, and they've done a lot.
Did they sit there and debate the artwork?
No. I mean, the problem is that Greg would want a particular artwork on there, but Pettibone would want to put his own on there. And by the way, Pettibone, Regis came up with names for all the kids, right? So Pettibone is a famous artist, and actually Greg Ginn's name was Kierkegaard, right? Kierkegaard is the Dutch philosopher that said the leap of faith, right? So he came up with names for all the kids, right? And so Pettibone stuck, and Kierkegaard didn't, right? Just Lurch did, right?
Definitely. First of all, thanks a lot, you guys. It's been a lot of fun. It's really good to have you here. I think by far one of the greatest songs ever written is Jesus and Tequila. And I was just wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about how you penned those lyrics and how it worked out.
Yeah, thanks. D. Boone was, during the Damage tour, I was alone at the office because Spot and Mugger were still going out in the van with the band, and it was a long tour. They played everywhere you could possibly play in '82. And D. Boone moved into SST, the void will be filled. And I was one guy suddenly in that room. And so, I generally had the country music on, the country AM's channel on in the office so that people didn't start talking about drum sounds and Dio versus Ozzy and, stuff like that. And, so I started thinking about a D. Boone solo album, and, we were just making jokes about stuff we could do. I remember talking to Chuck about doing a Corey Hart-style album of Henry. I could just see the photo of, the beefcake photo of the portrait, the moody portrait of sad, lonely Henry, and a bunch of ballads. But the D. Boone thing, I started writing songs because I was interested in the country lyric, and so I had 3 songs, and then when the Minutemen turned Double Nickels into a double album, I don't know what they were going to call it before they did that, but Zen Arcade by Husker Du as a double album. Mike immediately said, "Oh, we could do that," and but they didn't have enough lyrics, so they took lyrics from Henry and Chuck, and D. Boone told Mike that I had been writing some stuff for him, and it was fine with me. That the solo album was not necessarily a real thing. I was interested in the lyrics, and I would give it to him to see if anything came back, and they started playing that song, and it got on the album, and that was a lot of fun having D. Boone, in SST in that period.
Great song.
Yeah.
I know you said it was like right around the time that you were leaving, but I first came to SST via Sonic Youth, so I was wondering if you could talk about like E-Ball or Sister, the era when they kind of East Coast meets West Coast, 86, 87 kind of stuff.
Well, the Henry was into the early Sonic Youth records on Neutral, I guess, and Raymond had the records. That's where I first heard the early records, and I didn't like the Neutral releases, or the ones with. I like Richard Edson as an actor, not as a drummer. And but the Bob Burt album I liked. I was surprised that and that video Richard Kern did for him. I mean, I thought that was really great stuff. But I was leaving, so it was really Ray Farrell, Naomi Peterson liked the band, and Pettibone and Henry, and so it was a matter of Greg and Chuck deciding, with me out of the picture, what were they going to do? I had said about a year earlier, we had almost to say no to Greg and Chuck about the label for 2 or 3 years. And when we got to where we could do anything we wanted to, I certainly told Greg that, because I thought of it as his label, and if I didn't know who he was seeing out on the road that he wanted to work with or just do a record with, and so pretty much Sonic Youth was the first of the band signed, with me on my way out. We didn't have A&R positions really. Most of our bands were people we knew around LA, or they knew over time outside of LA.
But Sonic Youth wanted to be on SST.
Yeah.
Right? And we all liked them. We hung out with them. We saw them play, so it was more like a democratic decision that we all agreed upon it. But that was a no-brainer. Some of them weren't.
Yeah.
I actually have three questions. But, one is, when Miles Copeland folded Faulty, did SST take a hit? Two is, did you ever try and get on MTV? And three is, when is Nig-Heist going to...
All right, you guys, you ready?
Faulty, in that period, there was a lot of small distributors. I can think of Sweet Beat, Rebop in Texas. There was a bunch of people getting into it, Video Active or Radioactive, or these little companies, and we didn't like the idea of exclusive, so we never made an exclusive. Once in a while, we needed help, printing up a lot of covers, and we'd give a distributor a head start if they took that bill for us. But we hated even doing that because, of course, it alienated all kinds of people. And that happened after I left. Systematic went under, Faulty went under, almost all of them went under, owing SST some money. The thing about that is you don't owe the artist money for records you aren't paid for. The records are invoiced at $4, and they really sort of cost you, in material terms, $1.25. So it was weatherable, I think. Cumulatively, it was bad. I'm trying to think if there was a major hit.
Alternative Tentacles took a hit.
Yeah, and that was Faulty. Yeah, they were tied to Faulty. That's right. The record came in through illegal, the Miles Copeland label you're talking about, and the second question was
MTV.
MTV. We were able to work through that IRS TV show Sunday night, so we bought ads on that, and Mike Watt. I told him he had coveralls he worked on his vans with, his VW, and it was covered in, so he put that on and got his hands all greasy, and it's a pretty good ad. It was for the tour and the Blasting Concept Volume 2, which, if you remember, were sort of Dayglow red and Dayglow green, and so you had this greasy hand leave the product there under a beautiful light, displayed for the camera. And then and Mike was doing a voiceover, and then we cut to Mike in this greasy outfit, and he's got Stay Lube in his in his pocket, and he's got Sacred Trust in his VW van in the back, and they liked it so much that we didn't even have to keep paying them to run that ad, and whether it sold anything, it was the is it the Flesh Tones, the band that hosted that. So it had a kind of a goofy, it wasn't really copacetic with what we were doing, but it was, it was an open window to try something. And they would play a video in that space, and then 120 minutes sort of came on after that, and not enough, The Minutemen video, they actually played a little clip touting that they were playing it more than they played the video.
They play TV parties sometimes on
Did they?
on MTV, 120 minutes, sure.
Yeah. And then Night Flight was another thing on the USA Network that, might have done some stuff. And if you could stand those movies, maybe you'd catch some music. It's, late. But was there the Nig-Heist question?
Well, we need Spot, right? Okay, and so Spot's in Wisconsin, and he teased us a couple times. He's in Vegas?
In Sheboygan, Wisconsin.
Sheboygan, I never even heard of that. Anyways, so, Spot has to be there or we're not doing it. So he's teased a couple of times that he's going to come to L.A. So if you guys get like $20 each and then send it to Spot, I believe that he would come to L.A., but at this point, we probably won't.
Question?
How frequently did Nig-Heist get laid?
He didn't need Nig-Heist to get laid.
By girls.
By girls or guys?
Next question.
I would love to talk about Henry Black Flag versus the rest of Black Flag, but my question to you, Mugger, is Harley once told me that you wanted to call it the Neanderthals, and he came up with versus that Chromax. Is that true?
You can, there's like a Google, you can Google like Cro-Mag.
I'm asking Harley told me.
No. So there's an article where Harley says that Mugger and I came up with the name Cro-Mags.
You came up with Neanderthals, and
No.
you countered that with no. Chromax.
No, but you look it up. If you look up what he said, he says Mugger and I came up with Cro-Mags, but it was not. It was me and Eugene in Holly West in the ghetto in Hollywood at the time. Now, if you go to Holly West right now, it's like the nicest area around. But Google it and see what his words were saying when in an interview. But no, that's my name, Cro-Mags. Look at me, and then look at him, okay? Fucking, we're the missing link.
I actually saw the Nig-Heist. I'm the only one in the room that actually saw the Nig-Heist other than Joe.
Oh, we got two people. Oh, Linda saw it.
I saw you more than I cared.
Well, I told.
Thanks, Linda.
This on the radio station today, I told about the Bad Brains showed up at SST on Phelan Avenue, and they wanted to record with Spot, but he was out in Austin recording the Dix album, and it was a shame because they, we had this open invitation to them to do a record with us, and they seemed to be, like Red Cross and a few bands, they seemed to be holding back a little bit, hoping there'd be major label interest or something that would something they respected that would help them. Rick Ocasek did their first album, and Jem put it out, and I don't think it helped them at all, really. But anyway, they came by. So anyway, they're just hanging around at SST for a while, and they have a roadie, and he had a band called Blood Clot, which you may remember, and I remember, things could be maybe a little tense in the Bad Brains, and you don't know what the roadie's perspective on anything is. And Mugger is a great icebreaker, so he was teasing the roadie that they didn't need these rock stars. They should get rid of Bad Brains and Black Flag and go tour Nig-Heist and Blood Clot. And he was laughing at it, but you just didn't know, Bad Brains knew you, so they knew that, but he didn't know if he could laugh at that, if he was permitted, or, what the deal would be.
So the story of HR is after that I said, "You're a wimp, HR. I can beat you up." So we had a wrestling match when I said this, and that guy is strong. He took me over he's probably about 6'1" or whatever, a tall guy. But I thought I could beat him up, and he 2 seconds later he had me on the ground. And so weed doesn't make you not strong, okay?
I don't know if this is too loaded, but so I don't really remember life very much without cell phones or the internet at my disposal. So do you think that SST would have been as successful as it was if you had as easy communication at your hands at all times? Because I feel like when it's that easy, you're not as passionate about it. So
Yeah.
the fact that it was a struggle for you.
Joe doesn't have a cell phone.
Yeah. Come on, hold over. But
He lives in the Wild West. Nobody has them out there, right?
If it wasn't an effort of passion, do you think it would have been as
well, I was going to say that
That's why we didn't have one.
there's other things missing today. That the record store culture as we knew it was kind of like the people who were into Bowie and Iggy and the New York Dolls or Black Sabbath, and there were these different little subcultures, and maybe they had a favorite record store, but almost every record store had everything or tried to have everything. But at the peak of the album culture, you go to Sears and buy this stuff. so much stuff was well distributed, and the radio began to tighten up, and the record stores became, for a short while, more important. And the people behind the counter were pulling on music and pushing it to people. And that's missing today. And the cell phone is not, it's part of it. If you could transport it back to that world when music meant more to people, and I think in a way the whole train of American music was still unfolding, and it's fully unfolded by the time of the 90s. And then you're getting cooler music, and it's less tied to rock and roll heat and R&B heat and jazz heat and everything that made the 20th century. Gospel was, the tree before the recording industry, put it, on disc, and then the radio put it in the air, and anyone could check into anybody else's music. So, it was inevitable, I guess. I mean, in the moment, we weren't thinking about that. There were great bands still coming around. But I guess the breakthrough, once the majors started signing bands, and then Nirvana suddenly is on every format radio station, and they had already kind of been taken aback by the success of New Wave when Flock of Seagulls and ABC were suddenly on radio stations that weren't used to keyboards, and synthesizers. And so then suddenly Van Halen and Stevie Nicks records have synthesizers on them, carrying the main lead of stuff.
Can I say something, Joe? Iggy Pop said what? Look out, honey, 'cause we're using technology, right? So technology has changed everything. Genghis Khan, he was famous for what? Maps, right? Who's that guy with his hand in his Napoleon, what did he do? Morse code? Abraham Lincoln, what did he do? The telegraph? So everyone has used technology to benefit themselves. Technology has changed with the phone, and it has changed the way what we do, right? And so back then, we were using labels, Avery labels, to put the labels on and print them out. And we went down to the lady down the street to make copies. And I was the one that went down to make copies down the street. And the lady says, "Can you not show my other customers your pettibone crap?" So we just get back to Iggy Pop, right? And we always want to continue to use technology. And so if the phone and our phones and our cell phones and all that, do you think that not Greg Ginn would take fucking advantage of that? Right? Just like if Napoleon or Genghis Khan was here right now, do you not think that they would take advantage of what we're using now? These guys are great, and I put Greg Ginn with Genghis Khan, Napoleon, and those motherfuckers, because he would use fucking technology. So look out, honey, because I'm using technology. All right, sorry.
You guys want to make some final statements?
All right.
Yeah. Make some final statements?
Well, yeah, we circled around quite a bit timeline-wise. It's, I would say if you're interested in the books, the Enter Naomi book is really my time at SST and in LA. The rock book is more the theory and the history of the American music train as I understood it. And about half of the anthology, Life Against Dementia, is music, a quarter is film, and a quarter is political BS. And Stone Mail I've worked on for 30 years, and it's about Westerns and Soviet cinema, and it's my best book. And the Wyoming story is really what I went to Hollywood to do, which is write screenplays, and there's 3 that are set in Wyoming I put in one cover. Your Nig-Heist tour is when?
I just wish I was Iggy Pop and 5'1". No, I'm not.
Yeah.
Swedish magazine.
Tom Tricoli?
Where is he now?
I don't.
I think last time I heard he was on Santa Monica, and he shaved his hair, and he's like selling his butt for like $100. So if you're ready, he's there. No, we don't know where he is. I don't know where he is.
That guy remember me every Black Flag, Nig-Heist show, but he's gone.
Well, I think he's around, but Davo's around, but very tenuous information about some of these people.
Speaking of Black Flag and the 2-guitar lineup, isn't the 82 Demos really the greatest Black Flag record that never came out?
Probably. There's like 3 songs that the animal charge of that stuff is unbelievable. So,
Shows around that, I mean, I've just seen the YouTube, but that twin guitar lineup,
Chuck Biscuits, Chuck Dukowski, the My War with the 2 guitars. That's why the sourness, I love how Slip It In sounds, but it doesn't have the primo songs in all cases. And marketing-wise, it has one of the drearier covers, a Nun.
And Chuck Biscuits just wanted to play drums and sit around and read the newspaper and party all day. So when you get back to the commune thing, he did not want to do a shit of work, not put up any flyers, so he didn't fit in.
Yeah.
Right? Although he's a good drummer, he just didn't fit in with this communist sort of thing that we all had at that time.
That was done, though. Those recordings were done so slapdash. It really was just a learning tool for the band to pick apart arrangement problems and and so Spot didn't get to mix it. He just ran it straight to 2-track. They didn't really get sounds, so there was no thought at all. But it's a shame that it's the only thing there is, except maybe some board tapes, somewhere. But thanks for coming. And
thank you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Joe and Mugger for coming.
Thanks a lot.
This has been the best. It's the best event we've had so far. Store's just been here 9 months, and this has been like the most fun we've had so far. Hey, I'm not closing anytime soon. You're welcome to hang out and talk to these guys. If you got any
You
more
guys got to buy the bar.
personally for them. I've got all these books. We've also got the Bard for Life book.
There you go.
All the people that got the bars tattooed on them is what this is.
Joe has one on his. No, he doesn't have one.
I did my first reading at Stephen's first store.
That's right.
On
Back
Damon.
in Chicago, back in the 90s. Yeah. So.
Thanks a lot, Stephen.
Thank you guys. Thanks so much for coming. Music.